Hello, this is the voice of Stewart Pearce, and welcome to Deep Dialogues, a series of vital conversations that I have with global soul stewards from all over the world who provide us with an understanding of how we can create a new hierarchy of values that is absolutely significant at this unique time of becoming. I hope you enjoy, and thanks for listening. We are live. Charlie Seim, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with you.
It's so wonderful to see you sitting there. Charlie's actually in his apartment in Florence.
Yes, exactly. I am.
So if I may, I'd just love to introduce you to the wonderful people that are tuning in. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that there are hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands and thousands of people tuning in. So welcome everybody to
everyone. Yeah, exactly.
Special transmission of Deep Dialogues, because Charlie, as you probably all know, is a leading international violinist. And he is one of the he's the first major artist that I'm bringing into dialogue over the next few weeks to really hear what is happening with the soul of the artist at this time, because you're being starved of professional performance. Anyway, so this is the wonderful Charlie Seim. Let me just introduce you to him as I normally do by going through his bio, which is unbelievably impressive. So as I was saying, Charlie is a leading international violinist with a fantastic range of cross-cultural appeal, all starting from 3 years of age when he first heard Yehudi Menuhin, very famous violinist who, alas, has now moved back into Source, playing the Beethoven Violin Concerto. From this point onwards, Charlie developed an acute fascination for this musical instrument, which led him to eventually graduate from Cambridge and then the Royal College of Music, where he was taught by Itzhak Rashkovsky before being mentored by Shlomo Mintz. Charlie has performed with principal orchestras and leading conductors all over the globe, scoring rave reviews wherever he played, and his regular sonata partner is renowned pianist Itamar Golan. At the same time, Charlie is an ambassador for the Prince's Trust, a visiting professor at the Leeds College of Music in London, and coaches at the Nanjing University of the Arts in China. And indeed, he gives masterclasses around the world at institutions, for example, such as the Royal College of Music in London and the Accademia di Musica in Florence, where he currently lives. Welcome, dear friend, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Stuart.
That was an amazing moment. There you were, a small mite. You were 3-4 years of age.
That's right.
In the back of your mum's car.
That's it. I mean, it's become a legend now. It's mythology more than anything else. But it was obviously a moment that was significant because it was the seed of the journey that I subsequently, that I continued to sort of to be on. And it was Yehudi playing the Beethoven Violin Concerto. And I mean, I remember it was a very sort of particular moment when we went to see him play live at his festival in Switzerland, in Gstaad. And I remember hearing him play it. He was in his 80s at that time. He was very frail, not in his strongest moments, but I remember being there was something that touched my soul that obviously drew me to the idea of being able to make music myself, play the violin. And I mean, I didn't know exactly where I'd begin, but it was, music became fundamental.
Yes. The goddess Fortuna suddenly spoke to you. So if I may, I would love for the audience, I mean, apart from the fact that it brings me to tears when I hear you play, and the Massenet that I would just love to allow the audience to hear, because we have a recording of that wonderful concert that you gave in Rotterdam. It's 2 or 3 minutes of Charlie playing the violin. So Ryan, could you possibly play that so that everybody can just hear what this wonderful virtuoso that we have sitting in front of us is capable of achieving with his piece of wood? And the very fact that we have you sitting before us is just extraordinary.
I don't know about that, but thank you.
No. That was just, it gives everybody context, but I just find the entire interweaving of that orchestration just exquisite. And it's obviously, I don't know who the conductor is, but I mean, you have a conductor that is obviously so moved by your playing.
Yeah. No, he's a terrific. I mean, he's a sensational conductor, actually. Yannick Netzet-Seguin. It was a great pleasure to work with him on that occasion. Yeah.
So I mean, I know that the piece, the Meditation on Thais, is an immensely emotive.
It's one of the popular pieces for the violin to play, you know, with piano, with orchestra. It's become sort of, you know, so well known because it's so romantic, and it's, you know, obviously taken from this opera, the Massenet opera Thais, and it's been arranged for the violin. But it's got all of the tragic and kind of these sort of expressive elements that work very well on the violin. So.
Yeah, but you bring something extraordinary to it, because I've heard this piece so many times over the years, and you bring a level of virtuosity to it because of your own sensitivity, which I find very extraordinary. I mean, you know, it was one moment where there is this fit of passion that moved over your face, and you suddenly look really, really intense. And in that moment, I mean, it's completely in the way that, for example, when Lang Lang plays the piano, a year ago before lockdown, I was in New York, and friends of mine are friends of the Carnegie, and they said, would you like to go to a Lang Lang? I said, you know, is the Pope Jewish? For God's sake, let's go, because Lang Lang, I think, is extraordinary. And he's similarly, of course, a totally different instrument. For those of you who don't know, is a great pianist, is Lang Lang. But the level of tonality and resonance that you're able to produce through the bow into those strings, quite extraordinary, as Lang Lang can just so sensitively touch the piano keys and then, as it were, arouse us into these crescendos of energy. It's just extraordinary. So I felt similarly for that. I mean, does that piece move you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's one of those pieces that is played a lot. You know, it's almost overplayed, quite frankly. And so I've grown up hearing it so much. It's something I've played very often. So there's a reason why these things get overplayed, because they're brilliant. But I mean, finding the magic in it, being inspired, having a sort of freshness in your approach is more of a challenge with the repertoire that's overplayed. So you know, I am obviously very moved by it, but I try not to play it too much so that I don't sort of become numb. You know, it's beauty.
And in those moments when you know the piece so well, as referring to this, is the music leading you, or is there thought process leading you, or is there a dance between the two?
I think it has to be completely intuitive and musical when you deliver, you know, the notes, the sounds from the violin. There is obviously, when you work on the piece, there are elements, technical and mechanical elements, that perhaps need thought, need a more kind of cerebral engagement. But I think, you know, what makes it inspiring to me, and what it, you know, allows it to sort of have a sort of transcendental, you know, aspect for me, is when I'm completely removed from any sort of thought process, and I'm able to kind of resonate, vibrate through my body into the violin and then out into an architectural space, and feel we're all one with the sound and with this architecture of the sound, the pattern of notes that the composer has written, that we're putting together, that I'm putting together. So has to be intuitive and very physical, without too much kind of analytical thought.
Yeah, because the analysis has already been processed through all the rehearsals.
Exactly, and when one thinks how one should capture the sound, you know, that I would like to make, and the nuance in certain ends and beginnings of phrases, and the overall interpretation of the shape of the piece, you know, those are things that have to be thought about in the practicing process, you know. And sorry, something just popped up. But yeah, it's when you go to perform, or even when you just go to see how you respond to the piece as a whole and play it, even just for myself, that's a process that comes from within this bit of my body, not here.
Yeah, beautiful. And do you, when you play that particular piece and you speak of the transcendental, is that really transportative, or are there other composers that take you on an even greater journey?
Yeah, well, I mean, if I was to think of music that I play very often and doesn't necessarily have the overplayed, nature that perhaps the meditation from Thais has, because it's so sweet, there's almost something saccharine about it. If it's overplayed, you lose that perfect taste that it can have. It's, I think about solo Bach, something like the sonatas and partitas for solo violin that obviously I can engage with on my instrument. But I mean, any solo Bach for the keyboard works, for the orchestral works, the chorales, everything by Bach is something that you can just get stuck into and constantly be inspired by, I think.
And what is the greatest transcendental experience that you've been through? I mean, for example, have you found yourself moving into altered states of consciousness where time is suspended?
I think when it's a performance that's working, it has to be exactly that. I mean, I think time becomes, very elastic medium. It becomes something that is totally unrelated to, the kind of mundane humdrum of daily life. When you go on stage and when you really give yourself, sacrifice yourself to the moment in a complete way, time becomes elastic and you become suspended. You should become, you should be lifted above yourself. And again, it's not something that I'm able to always do, but that's why I play the violin, because there are moments I've experienced where I've really felt not so much disembodied, because in many ways I'm maybe more connected to my body than I could ever otherwise be, but I'm somehow beyond my body as well. And I'm in an altered state, as you say, and there seems to be a lot more meaning or fulfillment in that place for me personally than I can get anywhere else in my life anyway. So that's why I do it, and I search for those moments, but it's something that I'd like to get better at, being able to, or understand better how to achieve it more regularly. It's not something that seems to always come together in every opportunity that I have to perform.
And of course, I'm intrigued because I already see you processing perhaps is too clinical a word, but literally moving into the waves of transcendentalism, where space-time continuum is distorted. Because this is what I evoke in great artists. When I work with great artists, I work for the super objective of a peak state where the level of presence is so acute that one feels to be, as you were saying, very fully in one's body, but that the space actually expands supernally. And often artists are able to see supernatural manifestation, whether it be the spirit of the composer or the spirit of a maestro or a series of maestri that they feel particularly connected to, which allows them to move into that sweet spot, that God spot, where suddenly the music or whatever the artistry tends to be just suddenly changes. It's, because after all, we need to be reminded that your craft is an intensely physical one, and it's through your physical, and you feel to me to be a man who's very in tune with his body.
Well, the physical is incredibly important if you are exactly as a performer, as being on stage and being a performer, your body is your instrument. And obviously, I have an extension of my body, which is the wooden box of the violin. But it requires exactly a very, mechanical and physical investment.
And so when you've been playing, what is the most heightened state that you feel you've experienced where that level of suspension that you were describing takes place, where you become aware of the supernal or the divine or the supernatural or an altered state of consciousness?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think, firstly, I mean, the music itself, when you talk about, supernatural being, supernatural experiences, or being able to sort of capture, the essence of somebody that doesn't exist anymore in a physical sense anyway. Music is really the expression, the very sort of inner expression of somebody's consciousness. If you think that Beethoven wrote something 200 years ago, Beethoven's Violin Concerto, for example, which inspired me to start playing. It is the soul of Beethoven himself that manifests in sound waves. He gave us a notation, the idea of what should be played by the orchestra, how it should sort of diminuendo or crescendo at certain points, articulation. But it's essentially an instruction book for then a group of people to then evoke Beethoven, to bring his consciousness to life at any moment, whether it be 200 years later or 50 years after he died, or hopefully in another 200 years after our time. That's what's so mystical and eternal about music that's been written by people that obviously had a profound understanding of the human condition, and we're able to express it in sound. It's very abstract and yet totally, understandable, intelligible form. And so, yeah, for me, that whole concept is I already feel I'm kind of in a state of supernatural kind of exposure, because the idea of music, in its purest form is completely magical. It's mystical and it's magical, because you are having direct access to these great consciousnesses. And the violin as well is a sort of extension of that, because the violin, an old violin that's been around from, say, before Beethoven, 1735, is invested with the sort of energetic presence of every player that's spent time with it. If you spend a number of years playing a violin, you imprint your particular physicality on the instrument and on the fibers of the wood, because you draw the bow with a particular pressure and speed. You pin the string down with your left hand in your own particular way. And the more you play it that way, the more you sort of pass on your identity to that box of wood. And so I think of it as the ghosts of the players that have played the instrument within this funny little instrument. And that's what I'm doing. Obviously, I've played the violin for more than 10 years, so I'm adding my, stamp. And so there is this, there is this kind of, there is this supernatural force to the whole process of music making with the instrument and the whole idea of music, which for me is already transportative before I even begin. So there really should be no reason that I don't feel elevated every time I do it. But the fact of the matter is, it's a very challenging thing to go on stage and to sort of open yourself up and to deliver in a way that you demand of yourself. And if you've got a personality like me that's very demanding, it can be difficult to be able to actually just let go and allow yourself to just be in that incredibly special space of supernatural energy, let's say. So it doesn't happen to me every time. And I have had moments where, again, I've just felt connected, but it's not necessarily frequent enough because of my rigid, which is something that's, my rigid kind of perspective, which is something that I'm working on.
And I feel as you speak,
I engage with music or pick up the violin, it is walking into a realm beyond, that space and time, and it is transcendental, just in concept. So it should always be a celebration of that and something incredibly magical.
Well, as you speak, I have insight into how I can possibly help. Not now,
Yeah.
when we exchange beyond this wonderful dialogue.
Yeah.
There are keys, and they are very much to do with the frequencies that you're speaking about.
Yeah.
And I feel that the presence of your guarneri behind you is sort of, it's almost as though your left arm is reaching out. So
Yeah.
would you possibly introduce your extraordinary instrument to us?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, it's, as you said, a Granary Delta, and it was made in 1735 and was played by Yehudi Menuhin. So that story comes full circle. And, you know, it's my great...
Do you think he was playing it the day that you heard the Beethoven violin concerto?
I'm not sure, because I think he had it in the 1960s. I don't know that he only had it for a number of years in that period. So I don't think he was playing it when I heard him. But who knows? He might have just been using
I mean,
it.
that would be extraordinary, because
I will never be able to find that out, I guess.
the instrument sang to you, was calling you, was keening you.
Yeah.
You know, because that would be very extraordinary. So just to put it into context for those people who may not know what we're talking about,
Yeah.
it was made in Corona.
In Cremona, exactly. Cremona in 1935, which is where the great violin makers came from. Both Stradivarius and Guarneri del Gesù, the two biggest names in violin making, were from Cremona. And this is, you know, Guarneri didn't make nearly as many instruments as Strad because he died relatively young. So they're more rare. But a lot of the great players, Paganini, Asher Heifetz, you know, a lot of the great players, they had Guarneri del Gesù. So I'm very lucky to play this one now.
But could you possibly hold it up in the screen so that people could see it? Well, it's made of what wood?
So spruce, which is a kind of alpine pine on the top and bottom, and it's maple on the ribs on the sides. Mm-hmm. And they were particularly good at sourcing fantastic quality alpine spruce at that time, both Strad and Guarneri, which is a part of the secret to their, you know, the wonder of the instruments that they made. And they were old. The wood was old at the time that they were making these instruments. So the wood itself would have been even 100 years older than when they sort of constructed the instruments. So from the early sort of 17th century.
Wow, wow. And of course the bridge that we see is a modern device to make it easy on your shoulder.
This thing here, exactly. No, that's just a shoulder rest, exactly, which is that to prop it up because I've got a terribly long neck. But the setup of the violin is what basically is this chin rest, the tailpiece, the strings, obviously. This is the bridge, and the fingerboard, the neck, and the pegs. They get changed every now and then. When the neck gets worn down, let's say every 50 years, and you put on a new neck, or if you like a thinner or a thicker neck. The strings you change all the time. The bridge you can change based on your own personal taste for playing. If you have a thicker, more resilient bridge, you can have more tension over it, which can change the sound, or a thinner, sort of higher bridge for a more brilliant sound on the upper registers. The fingerboard can be various lengths. Again, it all affects the sound. Same with the tailpiece and the chin rest, even whether you have it going over the tailpiece or not. These are all things, the setup, which you make a personal setup for your own way of playing and getting the best sound that you can from it. But the box of the violin, the table, the back, and the ribs, and the scroll here at the top is what the original, is the original thing.
Extraordinary. And bearing in mind that it comes with this illustrious lineage, and it's handed down through the maestri over the centuries. Do you have it rather like when we're buying old property with a deed? Yeah. Do you have a list of all the maestri that have owned it or possessed it? Or...
There is a provenance that is quite sort of extensive. There's not much for the first 100 years, which is the case with a lot of these 18th century instruments, because musicians, violinists at that time are typically sort of court servants more than anything else. So we don't know much about them, unless it was made as a specific wedding gift for an aristocratic family or something, which Strad did a lot of. But from the 19th century, there's more information. They started to have value because people recognized that they made wonderful sound. They were actually these objets d'art, that they had sort of value as you know, as objects, beautiful objects. So then we have more of a sort of precise understanding of who owned them and when they were sold. And this, the Degville, which is the name of my violin, was owned by many collectors. Degville himself, Louis Degville, was a collector, amateur violinist in the mid-19th century. He had a number of violins, including this one. And you know, after him, it was the same. It was many collectors. Prince Wilhelm of Prussia, he owned it for a period. You know, again, owning a great violin. That was what it was. The Duke of Camposalecce, you know. And then in the 20th century, David Fulton had one of the big collections of Strauss and Guarneri's and Mark Potashny. There were many great collectors that owned it. So it wasn't played that much, which is why it's in tremendous condition.
And when you acquired it, did you have to audition to receive it, so to speak?
Yeah, well, it was a trust initially that gave me the possibility of playing it, and they had loaned me the previous violin that I was playing, which was a 19th century Presenda, made in Turin in 1831. And they had this violin, they acquired this violin, and they gave me the possibility of playing it. So I was very lucky.
Because I remember several years ago now helping Jamie Walton, the cellist, acquire his Guarneri, and I remember the story of him flying to Germany, I think to Dresden, where he moved into a studio somewhere, and there was this thing, because of course, like yours, they are these entities, aren't they, that have this life and vitality. I remember with his Guarneri, if he didn't play it, he looked really miserable sitting in the corner. Of course, slightly larger instrument than yours. And so he started playing, but he never actually met the maestro who had actually owned or had been loaned, as it were, the instrument for, I think, 40 years, 30 or 40 years. And this gentleman was auditioning some of the leading cellists throughout the world. And he was listening for who had the most specific rapport with
Jamie, as it needs to sound,
etc., etc. And Jamie was the one who won, so to speak. So I'm just absolutely fascinated, you know, because I come from a tradition of an oral tradition, an oral heritage, where I'm probably one of the last containers of the information that I was actually given by my mentor, Cicely Berry, who was the voice director of the RSC, who was taught by Clifford Turner, who first founded voice at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, and he was taught by William Powell. I mean, it goes back, all the way through to the latter part of the 17th century, and the actors that were reformulating theatre after the Restoration. Anyway, I'm always fascinated by it.
But that's the same as the violin tradition. I'm sure it's a very similar thing, because in fact, time within the context of the tradition of violin playing is really condensed, because, you know, not only just the violin that you're playing and the number of people that played it before, suddenly you can skip 200 years very quickly, but also the teachers that you have and the sort of the techniques that you learn. You're going right back, like when I sort of studying certain kind of bow techniques, you know, that were kind of developed a long time ago. You're engaging directly with that maestro, with that person that came up with this particular way of playing. Or, you know, Wieniawski, the great Polish violinist, who changed a lot of how you project sound. I'm going right into sort of the 1850s or 1860s with his music and being able to sort of talk to him through his etudes, through his caprices. And, you know, it doesn't seem long ago. Time is really condensed through kind of oral traditions that get passed on from teacher to pupil.
It feels as though you've been fortunate in having good mentors.
Yeah, I know I have had. It's true. I mean, I sort of think of it differently. So sometimes I think, God, I really have been learning very much on my, you know, I was an outsider in many ways. I didn't have a musical family or a musical upbringing that sort of nurtured my passion and obsession for playing the violin. And I had a number of good teachers, but again, they were always on the side. I think as a child who has a sort of yearning to play, you know, you need a stable that is, that kind of encourages and supports it on a day-to-day basis. which is not necessarily something I feel I had, because my family were very, very enthusiastic that I loved music, but we're not necessarily that keen that I would only play music, only play the violin, and not necessarily want to do anything else, which was the case when I was a child. So I had a slightly unusual trajectory, and don't always feel that I was sort of totally dependent on teachers or mentors, because I don't feel I was ever totally embraced by a musical community, because I was sort of half on the fence. You know, I was kind of having a normal sort of education, you know, on the one hand, and then I was kind of balancing my need to practice and improve on the violin on the other hand, rather than going full into one or the other. But I had very good teachers and good mentors, but I feel I was very much kind of, I feel I kind of had to find my own interpretation of the violin and how I responded to it and how I could make it personal to me, rather than being kind of really schooled in a kind of, in an official way, in a particular sort of technique of playing the violin, you know.
But you see, for me, that what that leads to is the understanding that it allows you your own creative genius to be able to flow through. And obviously, you know, as we can all see as we witness you, as we're party to you, you're being so wonderfully honest about your inner life, as well as, you know, that you've acquired in the world around the substance that we're just speaking. But at the same time, it just feels that your own sensitivity has been a device that has actually led you in the right direction. So your spirit has been leading you all the time. It's almost as though you've been a sleuth of the violin, a sort of psychic investigator, finding the right person, and then they pop up and they say hi, and they've been kind, hopefully, to you, and immeasurably wise in allowing you to develop the repertoire that you actually have. So, I mean, I would love for you to play so that we can actually hear beyond the concert, so to speak, the naked sound of what you're describing. Charlie is now, of course, wearing a very different outfit from the wonderful suit that he was wearing playing the Massenet.
Yeah, I know, it's true. It's a bit more athletic now than before. But I'll play a piece of Bach, the Sicilian, from Bach's first G minor sonata.
Wow. Bravo, 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 bravo.
Thank you.
That sounds extraordinary. And of course, you know, I know that we're all thinking, God, if only we were there in your presence so that we wouldn't need to deal with the technology. But thank you. That's, and, you know, we've just received a virtuosic performance for free.
Well, my pleasure.
If you were in a recital room, we would have had to pay thousands of dollars to hear you. That was extraordinary. So many conversations going on.
Exactly. Master of interweaving, you know, various voices in this incredibly complex, simple way.
If you were to choose a theme that comes to your mind from that particular piece, what is it?
I think the Sicilienne is from this G minor sonata. It's a dance, obviously, as all these Bach solo movements are, but there's something very sad. There's something very kind of melancholic about this dance. It's a very slow and expressive human dance. And for me, it's a very particular, you know, it's a special piece because I had a very close friend that was killed when he was 14, my best friend. And I played this piece at his memorial service. Ever since then, it has, because it's not, you know, overtly, you know, in the way that, you know, the Thais meditation is kind of right on its, you know, sleeve, you know, hard on the sleeve, kind of crying. Bach is very much more reserved, you know, it's much more internal, and for that reason, profound expression of, it's not just sadness necessarily, but it's just something very human. You know, it's the human experience, both its celebration, joy, and its, you know, its tragedy and misery.
I had a whole scenario playing through my consciousness, not that it was something that I was seeking, but a whole scenario that actually echoes exactly what you described, of the last dance of the evening, two young lovers, and he was about to go off to war, and she was tragically involved in the deep melancholia of the possibility that she may not see him again. That's what suddenly flashed into my consciousness.
Yeah, well, that's a very good scenario because it is that sort of thing. It's the sort of life and death, you know, juxtaposition that great art is able to touch upon. Because I think that's in our own consciousness when we're able to reflect and meditate on, you know, our own existence and our own, you know, limited time and mortality and what have you. It's that consolation we get from great art that, you know, those moments or the scenario that you've just depicted has such incredible beauty because of its isolation in the context of, you know, human life, and the fact that it represents something finite.
Yeah, yeah. And you know, there is a very famous statement, I know, I cannot remember where it came from, what provenance it is, but how art is the only vindication for suffering. And so, you know, in a sense, it is a medium for transcendentalism. It is a medium whereby we literally weep out or laugh out our pain or our suffering or our joy or our love.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, you have such an extraordinary sensitivity as you play. It must be very, very difficult through COVID of not being able to get on that platform in front of that 100-piece orchestra. Can you imagine, everybody? This gentleman is standing often in front of a 100-piece orchestra, which takes a bottle and nerve to do with this. Not just 100 people, but it's the volume of sound that's produced, right?
Yeah, no, it's a battleground. That's it. You know, you stand alone and you have to rise above this army behind you. You know, and you know, when you play Brahms violin concerto, Sibelius concerto, Tchaikovsky, you know, these are great, huge, momentous, kind of vast pieces of music. You need stamina, endurance, and an incredible intimacy and sensitivity as well to sort of bring these concepts to life. But no, I obviously miss the stage. I miss being able to, you know, communicate with an audience as well as the conductor in the orchestra, and have this incredible kind of communion concert situation represents for me. it's, you know, but it is what it is. I mean, it's been a forced sabbatical for me, or a forced mini retirement at this period in my life, which has been great in many ways. You know, I feel that it's recaptured, you know, my kind of, I guess, my love, but also my kind of reverence for, you know, what it is that I do, and the privilege that I have, you know, to play, you know, these great works, and to be able to have a stage if I ever get one again, you know, in a way that I perhaps was not as or aware of, you know, before this period. And this kind of hibernation, I feel, has helped me go deeper into my own, what it is that I want to express with the music. You know, who is it that I am that has something to say, so that I can pick up the violin and actually say something real, something really sincere, rather than just playing the notes as brilliantly as I can and then move on to the next place. And yeah, and this has been a time where I feel I'm doing that, because I've also broken down my daily routine. You know, I was so kind of addicted to my disciplined, rigorous daily routine, whether I had a concert to prepare for or not, and a lot of just unnecessary kind of working the violin and kind of almost robotic playing on the violin, and losing the that kind of essential, meaningful substance that music is all about. Became really just too mechanical. And so I've lost that routine now. I don't practice every day in the same, you know, ritualistic and you know, routine-like way. I'm just living my life, you know. It's more of the kind of Arthur Rubinstein, the great pianist, who sort of discouraged students from practicing. And he said, you know, you should live your life so you've got something to say. There's no point sitting in a practice room for 8 hours a day. But I mean, you need to practice a lot, obviously, because it's a demanding instrument to play. But I realize for me at this point, it's more of a self-reflective time, to be able to come back with something, something more honest to say, you know, coming from a more real place within myself.
This is amazing. Because I have a lot of artists coming to me who are really distressed at this time, and most of them are vocal performers, you know, and they're really, really distressed. In a few weeks' time, I have Corinne Winters coming on, who is a wonderful mezzo who has a timbre, a tessitura, which is rather like Maria Callas.
Yeah,
she's been singing for the last 10 or 15 years and is in distress. You know, what she's doing is teaching a lot. She's an American lady, and so she's in Philadelphia with her husband and teaching, but very distressed. So it's fascinating to hear you speak of this period of fermentation. It seems.
Yeah, exactly. Because I think I've been too kind of dogmatic in many ways, just in the way I've been living my life, even beyond, you know, playing violin. And there's been a kind of liberation with this COVID experience, I feel, that's disorientated me and definitely kind of knocked me off center. But I don't feel that's been so bad for me as an individual. And I don't know exactly where I'm going. I don't know how I'm going to build my career from here necessarily. Everything's very kind of uncertain and up in the air. But it doesn't really bother me that much, because I feel more connected to what it is I want to do with the violin. And I feel a much more connection, relationship with it than I feel I had before.
And so in many ways, you're tuning into the sacred purpose of the way that it is an extension of your being.
Yeah.
And the opportunities that will come, because there is an anticipation in the moment you play that you can continue playing, very simply. And, you know, I feel that that's not necessarily a conscious thought for you at the moment, as you're saying, but in terms of what my reality is as I experience you playing, it's, oh, I can't wait to see you on the Carnegie stage, or I can't wait to see you in London, in the festival hall, whatever, you know, possibly a greater concert platform than that, just simply so that everybody can experience the richness of what you're playing. Do you play in your sleep? Do you dream playing?
I have. I mean, the violin's featured in many of my dreams, not always in a good way. You know, I've been backstage completely unprepared for a concert, where I've gone on and then the different concerto starts playing before I'm about to come in, and the one that I was expecting. You know, I've had nightmare scenarios. Yeah, but
I haven't.
Sure, there's many wonderful positive ones too.
I haven't acted for 40 years. I've been looking after actors for 40 years, but I still have the actor's nightmare, exactly as you describe it. And it's always Hamlet, where I come on and I'm playing Hamlet, which I did once when I was about 27, 28.
Oh, wow.
And I can't remember the bloody lines. And it's terrible looking into the face of all my fellow actors who are, what are you going to do now? What are you going to do now? It's the most awful. It's an internal fever of perspiration. And then just hoping that a big hole is going to open up so you can drop into. How interesting that you have that. But it must be also energetically very unusual, because you're so well. I suppose you do balance your career, don't you, between the formal 100-piece orchestra, the chamber process, to the more intimate concerts that you provide with the sonata concerts that you provide. That must give you, energetically, in terms of its bandwidth, you have a very intimate delivery, and then something that is infinitely more epic.
Yeah, they're two very different experiences. I mean, as you were saying, the orchestral experience, when you go to play the Great Violin Concerto with the full orchestra behind you, is the most charged, experience you can have as a violinist, as a solo violinist. It's very demanding, and it's a pressurized situation, and you need to be heroic to do it. I mean, anybody that goes and plays the Tchaikovsky violin, however well they do it, they've got to have balls, and they've got to have something, that makes them go out there and deliver it in that sort of pretty unique setting. The orchestra behind, all playing the violin, knowing exactly what you're doing, and then the audience in front, and the conductor over you, watching everything you do. It's a very particular, experience. And then obviously the chamber situation, with me when I play with a pianist, or when I play with a chamber group, that is in many ways sort of more essential music making. There's something very kind of sort of a sportsman-like about playing the concertos. You go up there and you're alone, and as much as you've got the orchestra and there is dialogue between you and the conductor and the orchestra, essentially you're alone and you're delivering on the highest level that you can, something incredibly virtuosic and challenging. Whereas when you're working on a level with a pianist or with a chamber group, trio, quartet, quintet, you're really using the language of music to communicate with each other on the stage. So it is very intimate, and in many ways it's a more essential musical experience. So yeah, the variety of those two is very important, and I think that the one sort of stimulates the other and kind of informs the other as well, actually, because you need aspects of both in each scenario. Yeah.
And I just wanted to remind us, not you and I, but for the people that are listening in, what we keep using this term virtuoso. I just wanted to use this definition of a virtuoso is a highly accomplished musician whose technical accomplishments are so pronounced they dazzle the public. Do you feel you dazzle the public?
Not always, definitely not always. I've had better moments and worse moments, I think.
You were dazzling in the Massenet.
Thank you.
And what's also interesting is that you carry a stage presence which is unique in your form, which many violinists don't. Obviously, they have an extraordinary quality of vibration when they begin to play, but often they don't. You have a wonderful degree of performer without necessarily being, it's by no means superficial. It's just that every part of you indicates, or illustrates rather, that you're part, that you're enjoying what's taking place.
Yeah.
It must be extraordinary when you're developing the bandwidth, as you were describing, you're playing concerto in front of a 100-piece orchestra, and then moving to a chamber.
Yeah.
What does the energy elasticity feel like?
In terms of going from a concerto to the sort of...
I mean, there you are in the heroic, epic vein where your bandwidth suddenly stretches out. You know, it's like an actor going into one of those huge speeches, like "Once more into the breach, dear friends," or "To be or not to be," and then immediately coming into the chamber and playing something immensely, you know, playing a sonata.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I suppose it's similar to, yeah, you could say it's like, you know, if you're playing, you know, if you are Henry V or whatever, and you're on stage and you've got to hit the back rows and you've got to blast it larger than life. And then if you're on film and you're capturing somebody whispering and expressing every little bit of their face, maybe that's an analogy that one could make. But I guess there are aspects of both that need to, you know, be, you know, as much as it's, as you say, an epic experience to be playing a concerto in front of the orchestra, and you have to be larger than life, and you have to be, you know, your whole body language has to express the music in a big way because you're alone with 100 people around you, and so you have to stand out, you know. So physically there has to be a kind of a language that you find that can communicate with the audience. But then you also do need the intimacy, because you don't draw an audience in just by being larger than life for 40 minutes, you know. So you need to also adopt some of those very, very kind of quiet and sort of still moments that you can access far more easily, perhaps in a chamber music context, so that you draw the audience in. So on this grand scale, everything can be brought down. Bandwidth can actually be minimized for a moment and then brought out. And it's the same with the chamber music, because although it's a smaller setup, you have to then make it symphonic at times. You know, it has to be enormous. And then you can come back. It's the contrast and the variety that make music alive and makes music alive and makes it, you know, so incredibly kind of relatable and, you know, an expression of human life and human experience, because it comes from one extreme to another, and it draws you in to the narrative of the, you know, the story that's being told, you know, within the notes. The abstract story. Again, I always feel what's brilliant about music is that one doesn't need, you know, a lot of teachers I remember used to try to say, give an actual sort of literal narrative to the music, which I always think is a terrible mistake, because I think the key is to get tuned in to the actual language of the sound, and then you realize there can be a narrative. It doesn't have to be literal, it doesn't have to be, you know, playing out a sort of Hemingway story or something. It's actually a narrative in the sound itself. It takes you on this sonic journey. Which is, for me anyway, more moving, because it's so abstract, because it's not grounded in anything material or kind of, you know, day to day or artificial, you know. So yeah, the variety needs to exist in both contexts.
I'm with you. This is the way that I see energy. And I guess because we're dealing with the same plane of reference, it being so sonic, this is the way that I work with great actors, you know, how they can actually alter their bandwidth. And you've used two very interesting expressions through our conversation. One being how you key in. And now again, you mention it, the same thing conceptually, but in a different way, by talking about tuning in. It's like tuning into a bandwidth, isn't it? And for you, it's a very sensual, sensory, physical process. How do you tune in?
No, exactly. Well, I mean, you're right. It's a very sensory and sensual experience. I mean, even just tuning the violin isn't purely my ears hearing when each string is exactly a fifth apart from the next string, so that I know the violin's in tune. It's very much the vibrations that come through my body, through my jaw into my body, where I can actually sense that the violin's in tune more than I can hear that it's in tune. As much as you're using your ears, you're really physically responding, you know, to the sound waves. And so what was your question again? You're saying about the...
Talking about tune, is there a particular sensory awareness that you use to tune in.
Exactly. Well, it starts from that process because obviously you're using your many more senses than just your ears to be able to kind of connect with the sound waves themselves on a physical level. And once you're there, you are tuning in. And then you're distracted from any thought process. You're getting into this transcendental place where you're physically kind of vibrating with the music, internally as well as externally. And when you really focus on that, you can avoid any kind of understanding in a mental sense of what you're doing. And you can leave behind your earthly identity and move into something, beyond.
And because we're learning more and more today, because sound is being used as a healing modality, both through the sung voice, through instrumentalization, but also through sonic waves produced by a series of machines, or indeed a crystal bowl or a gong. So we know that sound affects matter. Do you find that when you play certain composers, do you find that your body resonates at a certain field, which leads you to feeling certain ways that you've discerned over the years that you prefer not to go to?
Oh, you mean negative responses? Certain, like playing some things that I just can't connect with.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking, you're talking about vibrational currency that is moving through the whole of you. It's not just moving through the air around you. And of course, we know that sound is disturbed air. It's moving deep into, because you're very sensitive, so moving deep into the core.
You're right. I feel I can never play anything that I don't feel I can sort of transmute into something that I relate to. So I think the role of the performer or the messenger of the music is a channel that turns this energy into something that the messenger relates to, so that they can express it to an audience. So if I don't respond to certain music, initially I won't necessarily play it. But then, for instance, I've had experiences where I've been asked to play something. I said, you know what, I'm going to take it on as a sort of challenge to see if I can actually fall in love with this piece as a result of working on it and finding my voice within it. And sometimes it takes a lot more of an effort, and it takes, much more investment, personal investment in the piece, and searching within myself for something that can find one connection that then can grow out into many more connections within the music. And then it's my energetic response to that will change my initial perception into something of the music, into something else, because I'm a channel that collaborates with the music to create something in the moment that I perform it. So there's nothing that can't be, positive vibration for me if I want it to be. It's just up to me to kind of find that dialogue, and the desire to have that dialogue, to bring that connection to life. Because every piece of music is a very personal, a very personal kind of response for each individual that decides to play it. So Beethoven Violin Concerto has been played by many people since it was written, but it's very, very significant and special for each person who plays it, because it's a collaboration between that person and the notation that they read and digest and interpret and try to bring to life on their instrument. So it becomes
many of the Renaissance artists, and I'm speaking about the Italian Renaissance, they believed, I'm thinking of the very illustrious beings such as Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Giotto, Raphael, that they believed that they had a guardian angel that was their genie that allowed them the genius. So what they did was to obviously practice their craft through hours and hours of physical manipulative energies, but then they just let go and allow their guardian angel to move through. Do you feel that you have a genie, a guardian angel that moves through you?
I'd love to think that I do. I don't know. That's something I need to explore maybe with you and find out if I have someone specific. It's a nice thought though. Sometimes I feel very alone, and I wish that I did have that.
Yeah, because you see, I mean, you have genius in your playing, and the root of the word genius comes from the genie.
Yeah.
The genie gives you genius, and that.
It's another force that taps into you. Yeah.
And when you've, I mean, you know, we need to unfortunately come to an end. I'm absolutely riveted by this conversation. I hope you are. I mean, it's fascinating. But when you've played a very large, I mean, it could be, I suppose. I'm just thinking of the volume of sound in a concerto. How long does it take you to come down after a performance?
It's a good question, because it's always very different. It depends on the experience I've had out there. You know, if I've really struggled to climb that mountain, you know, I can be completely destroyed afterwards, and it can be a recovery, both physical and psychological, that takes time. You know, but then there are other times where I've been maybe I had a guardian or something. I was lifted up the mountain. I basically flew, and I realized the summit, and I just plummeted down, you know, and landed on my feet, reborn basically, you know. I can come off as a new person, and, you know, I'm revitalized, you know, I'm completely, you know, I've engaged in a totally, you know, higher perspective, you know. So it really just depends. It's never the same, you know. No stage, even if it's the same stage, playing the same music, you know, it's just never. It's completely different every time. The energetic sort of setup is always unexpected and surprising.
And do you find that your music playing then proliferates further into, for example, personal relationships, where it plays havoc with your personal relationships?
What do you mean? Like the fact that I'm consumed by music means that I would be distracted?
Well, I was thinking of particular vibrations, you know, because we were discussing before we came on air the whole nature of the way that Bach has his vibration, depending on your mood. The way that the whole of your physiology, physically, emotionally, mentally, and spiritually, is being balanced. But then when we go all the way to Stockhausen, he has his vibration. And I just wondered if there were any particular vibrations that were more disconcerting than others.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to say, because I think everything I choose to play is because it doesn't sort of disturb me in any way. I mean, there has to be an aspect of disturbance and maybe being disconcerted, because music, it shouldn't always be, you know, plain sailing. But I mean, it's moving more than anything else. There's aspects of joy and tragedy, and there's aspects of disturbance and peace, you know, in all great music. And I would only play it because it has that, you know, kaleidoscope of expression. So I don't feel there's anything that would just be completely disturbing and nothing else, not rewarding in any other way. Certainly if there was, I wouldn't play it, you know, it wouldn't have any value for me necessarily. It's the sort of journey between all of these various things that makes it resonate with me.
Charlie, this has been an extraordinary deep dialogue. I thank you so much for your participation.
It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Well, bless you, bless you. It's an absolute joy being with you and hearing your thoughts and feelings, and just holding up the witness of your great artistry against the experience that I've had over the years of my own artistry, but perhaps more importantly, those whom I serve, the great artists that I've served. And, you know, we have an interesting conversation, so let's continue. I feel that we can do great things together about me helping your artistry. And I'm sure, you know, everybody out there is thinking, wow, that was really interesting. What happened at the time? And so Charlie is one of the, as I said in the early part of our deep dialogue, that Charlie is one of the a few artists, I have 5 artists altogether, that has begun this sequence into the soul of the artist at this time of COVID. So my friend, from my heart to yours, thank you. Please do stay there while we just finish this transmission, and then we can just continue. So namaste, everybody, and thanks for tuning in.